Andy Euler is a journalism fellow for the University of Texas at Austin and the Energy Institute, as well as Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy, and he'll be leading a panel on the role of measurement, reporting, and verification in global LNG and trade. And Andy?
Hey. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for having me. Perfect. I'm spending the entire year. This is wonderful. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm spending the whole year this year as a fellow in a partnership with the University of Texas and Columbia University. Basically, what I've been telling people is hoping to make folks and the public more generally just a little bit smarter about energy issues, about sort of the things that we talk about when we're studying these things and thinking about these things all the time. Arvin was actually over a beer. We talked about sort of what I should be doing for the entire year, and we had a discussion, and it sort of made sense for me to spend the year putting together these panels and sort of moderating these sorts of things, but also putting together a database where people can go and learn more about the energy industry sort of more generally. But without further ado, I wanted to get my co-panelists up here, Corey and Chad, from Cheniere and also from Williams, to sort of walk me through, because it's funny, I was on a panel last week moderating, talking to industry about the role of hydrogen, and I'm super, super interested in sort of industry's take on these partnerships, but also industry's sort of involvement in this space. And we were going to start, and I would love to have y'all sort of start us out. Corey, give us a sense of, just tell us who you are and also sort of your involvement in this space, why this partnership makes a whole lot of sense.
Well, there you go. I probably don't need it, most people would say, but I'll go ahead and use it. Hey, it's great to be here. Andy, thanks for the introduction. My name is Corey Grindle. I am Cheniere's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. I have been in the gas business for about 30 years. It's great to be back here at UT. I am a graduate a long time ago. I actually have a couple UT ties. And Chad, I've known Chad for a long, long time. I was actually going to wear one of my UT ties, but when I was packing last night, my wife said, I don't know if I'd pack that. And so I started thinking about it, and when Chad and I were talking about it, my wife is an Aggie. So there may be a little bit of subtle reason why she didn't want me to do it. But a little bit about Cheniere. If you don't know who Cheniere is, we are the United States' largest exporter of LNG, liquefied natural gas. We take gas from pipelines. We do a lot with Chad and his business. But we take gas from pipelines from all over the United States. We have 2 facilities on the Gulf Coast where we take the gas, get it to 260 degrees below zero, which is where natural gas will turn into a liquid. It's 1/600th of the volume that it is as a gas when it's a liquid. Put it on big boats, and we ship it all around the world. So we deliver to 44 different countries and territories. We are the second largest producer of LNG in the world. And kind of the way that I would start off this panel, and Chad's going to give an introduction, but Cheniere and U.S. LNG exports are the fulcrum of taking the domestic U.S. business and moving it to the world. We started doing this in 2016. Before that, all the LNG that was used around the world came from Asia, Africa. Those are the primary places, a little bit in the Middle East with Qatar. And when I'm being sarcastic when I say just a little bit, the Qataris are the largest, by far, the largest producer of LNG in the world. So we'll get into it in the moderation. You can feel free to ask some questions, but I'll turn it over to Chad to talk about Williams.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thanks for having me here. Chad Zamrin, work with Williams, and Williams is a company that's been in business for over 100 years. We're an energy infrastructure company. We move about 1/3 of the nation's natural gas. We own production, we own gathering, processing, the downstream transmission infrastructure that brings the gas all the way from the wellhead to customers like, which by the way, my favorite customer in the room today. But we bring
You
the
don't deliver to UT?
No, I don't think so. But we bring that natural gas from wellhead to water, wellhead to burner tip, and why this is so important for us is we are true believers in the benefits of what our industry does for the world. And we've got to be able to show with credibility that we can manage the efficiency of our value chain so we can focus on the benefits of natural gas. Natural gas has been the largest decarbonization tool in the United States over the last 15 years. It's not a theory, it's a fact. We can do that both here at home and around the world. And that's largely been through displacing coal power generation here at home. You saw that EIA chart. I think it's an interesting track record that EIA has of trying to predict energy use around the world, but there is a voracious appetite for energy around the world. We use about 15 times more energy per capita that a person in India would use. And India is now the most populated country on the planet. They're just getting started raising their people out of poverty and trying to gain access to energy. And they're going to turn to the most available, cheapest resource they can find. So we've got to make sure that they're turning to clean energy products, hopefully that we can produce here in the U.S. So that's why this is so important. We've got to show with credibility that we can manage the emissions of our value chain so that we can focus on the benefits of what we can do with our product.
One of the things Arvind has brought up to me a whole lot, and I feel like this just keeps coming up, is sort of the idea of developing a common language. And Dave talked about a toolbox, and sort of this idea of figuring out exactly how to talk about these things, how to talk about monitoring, how to talk about verification. I'm curious from y'all's perspective, getting involved with academic institutions, sort of why that makes sense. If you're just going out as a member of industry and doing this yourself, you can do it. Why do these sorts of partnerships make sense from y'all's perspective?
I guess the way that I would start it off is we're one of the founding members of MDEL. And when I think of academia, or I think of the business world, when I think of where we need to be in the future, much like Chad said, we're going to be in the energy business for a long time. Just like that chart said, by 2050, solar, wind, it's going to meet the growth of the world, but the world is going to continue to grow in energy. The reason why we want to partner with UT and Colorado School of Mines and other academic facilities is they have a much better heartbeat on technology than we do. And when you look right now, we're going to talk next 2 days, we're going to talk about MRV, QMRV, we're going to talk about cleaning things up, right? At the end of the day, the technology to do it right now is not there. Just like Arvind showed in his presentation, depending on a bunch of different factors, continuous monitoring is not continuous. So partnering with academia is crucial for developing the new technology, testing the new technology, and then the massive amount of data that comes out of these tests has to be processed. And academic institutions are way better to handle that than businesses.
Yeah, and I would also say that, it was mentioned, I think David or Arvind, the unbiased, credible participation of educational institutions is really important. But maybe, for me personally, even more so, my wife is telling me that I'm in the throes of my midlife crisis. I'm getting pretty emotional these days. We just sent our oldest off to college, and he's going to be an engineering student. He is an engineering student at Purdue University. What I hope for him when he comes out of college is that he recognizes that this is going to be one of the greatest challenges of our generation. How do we provide energy for the world, the increasing appetite for energy around the world? How do we do that in a way that continues to provide benefits for society, but does it in a way that is affordable and is a way that dramatically reduces emissions? That is the challenge of our generation, and I think that tapping into universities and making sure that the talent of the future recognizes. I'm convinced, the reason I'm in this business, I'm convinced our industry has the most powerful role to play in energy evolution, not just transition. I mean, the energy evolution that's required to continue growing prosperity around the world, but do it in a way that solves the challenge of providing lower emissions and, a clean energy for everyone.
And one point that I throw onto that, because this is a global issue. Yeah. When it comes to talking to countries, when it talks to governments, to foreign companies, Part of the reason why we want to partner with academia is to have a third party, because transparency and that verification is the bedrock of trust. And because this is a global product, I totally agree with Chad that this is really the opportunity of the next 20, 30 years. This is a decadal problem, not a decadal opportunity. That verification and the transparency that builds that foundation of trust is key when you're dealing with other governments. And that's something that's really got to be taken into account in the global viewpoint.
And you talked about sort of the diversification of, different basins, things like that, different emissions, different, Arvin was even showing and Dave were showing sort of different technologies that are being implemented. You talked about verification, and you and I had talked a little bit about the idea of, is there a business opportunity for third-party independent verification, or does it need to come from regulatory bodies? Does it need to come from governments? Are those two conflicting, or can they work together? What do you think?
Yes. No. I mean, I do think it's both. Right now, the call from our customers around the world is they want to see progress, right? They don't know what that is. So I do think that there is a role for government to set standards. Is there a third-party opportunity to take advantage of that? Absolutely. What we are not seeing right now is a call for differentiated gas or clean gas or whatever language you want to use. Our customers want to understand what we're doing. And our QMRV program, which Fiji is going to talk about tomorrow, is really one of the first steps that we've taken. And what we're able to show is just by doing it for a year, we've already been able to identify problems, fix it, go back and do more verification to show that it actually worked. So the key is continuing this technology, like I was talking about earlier, working with Chad and producers, all segments of the chain to deliver hydrocarbons around the world, to make sure that everybody knows what their part is and can verify and be that transparent foundational partner, because that's what the world is going to require of us.
And Chad, you and I talked about sort of along that whole large supply chain, verification comes up basically at every stage, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it was shown it's an incredibly complex supply chain. I equate kind of what we do just on the pipeline side of the business as like a multi-lane interstate highway system, but we also connect to gathering systems that spider across every supply basin. We've got production sites, across every part of the United States, and we want to be able to, with credibility, track the energy that we move through the value chain. Just to make it clear, I mean, the reason we're here, methane is the Achilles heel of the value chain. If we can't keep the methane in the system, then we can't focus on the benefits of natural gas when it's delivered and displacing higher carbon emitting fuels. So we've got to be able to track what we bring into the system. And I talk about how natural gas is sourced today, and Corey's been buying gas for his entire career. We buy it primarily based on geography and price. And we need to introduce the next element, the third element of how we will source energy across value chains, and that's going to bring the efficiency, the emissions fingerprint of the energy into that equation. So we will be connecting customers to the cleanest production, travel the energy through the very cleanest lanes of the highway, and bring it to the customers that will use it in the most efficient way possible. And so that's the evolution of the natural gas value chain that this effort is so important to play a role in.
Corey, you had talked about your customers not necessarily asking for differentiated gas right now, but at the same time, in 10, 20, and if you're selling to places that are asking for that or are going to be asking for it soon, you have to be thinking about these things right now, I imagine, yeah?
We are, and kind of one of the taglines that I like to talk about both internally and externally is we want to be able to make the investments and the decisions today that will really affect tomorrow. So it's an interesting look back over the last 5 years because we have a bunch of European customers as our long-term customers. Prior to 2020, 2021, they were saying, we don't like fracking. We don't like this about US LNG, but we know we need to have it. Well, come 2022, with the conflict in Ukraine, the lack of Russian flows, we filled in. The U.S. LNG delivered over 80% of all the gas that was consumed in Europe via LNG exports. So the story has kind of changed a little bit, but let's be honest that the conflict is going to go away at some point. And with everything that is going on in Europe to want to decarbonize, it may not be something they're asking for right now, but to your point, we know that that's something that they're going to be asking for. And that's why we're trying to stay ahead of this, as well as we want to do the right thing for the planet as well. We care. So it's the right thing to do. And more than anything, we want to be able to meet our customers' needs and the commitments we've made, but we also want to do the right thing.
Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, I was just going to add, just to put it into like facts. I mean, this is why this is so important. In Europe, yes, you hear a lot about decarbonization in Europe, but if you took the top 5% emissions emitting coal plants around the world, 2 of which are in Europe, Poland and Germany, 2 countries that, Germany in particular, you hear a lot about decarbonization, but they burn lignite coal, which is a very high polluting energy product. If you took the top 5% coal plants from an emissions perspective around the world and converted them to U.S. produced natural gas, you would eliminate 30% of the emissions from the power sector globally. I mean, that doesn't take some radical new invention. That doesn't take some radical expansion of an industry. I mean, that is technology that we have today. That's why what we're working on is so important. If you really care about the environment, if you really care about climate, that's the kind of impact that we can have by taking what we do globally.
I wanted to talk a little bit, bring up sort of the 4-letter word in y'all's industry, it seems, greenwashing. We need to talk about it because there's going to be speculation about, well, Cheniere's getting involved in this because they want to sort of point to, we have this partnership with academia, and so we're trying. Williams is getting involved in this because, we're trying to do this, and we can show you some things. It sounds like what you're telling me is, no, this is a part of the future of our business, and so that's why we're getting involved.
Perfect. You couldn't have said it any better. Here, let me give you $20.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah,
no,
yeah. My fellowship is up at the end of the year. So
no, but really, that's the truth. There's really nothing to add on to that, but that is the honest truth.
Yeah, I would also say we're following the facts, and I would also say that we're spending a lot of time. Corey, Cheniere and Williams were investing in some organizations, one called Natural Allies for a Clean Energy Future, one called the Partnership to Address Global Emissions, and we're out trying to communicate with primarily focused on Democrat policymakers. And when you go out and you talk about what we can do in the natural gas industry, there's actually pretty broad support for our business. Another important phenomenon that doesn't get talked about enough, but Texas is a great example. I ask my kids all the time, where do we have the most wind and solar energy around the country? And my kids will say it's got to be California, or it's got to be up in the Northeast where we hear all about it. It's right here in Texas. It's in Oklahoma where we're headquartered. And every day, the reason why the lights don't oscillate with the change in wind and the reason why the lights stay on when the sun sets is because natural gas is picking up the slack as the wind changes and the sun is variable throughout the day. It is the only reason why we have the ability to accelerate renewables. Wind, solar, they only work because we provide a flexible backstop to enable it. And so I do think as we educate folks, we can be an important part of the solution. We're not, I think industry at times has been more adversarial, sure. But I hope that as we educate folks on what we can do, it's fact-based, it's credible, we can demonstrate that we're committed to being part of the solution.
And just to kind of throw in something that Chad said that relates to exactly build onto that is what we're doing here is so important because if I go back to that foundation transparency and the verification the verification then being transparent with it, having that be the foundation. When you go talk to policymakers, we want to ensure that we have the facts, that it's not seen as greenwashing, that it can be verified, so that we are influencing those policymakers, so that we don't see bad policy implemented. Because what I would say is prior to 2022, Europe had made some pretty bad policy changes. Now they're kind of realizing some of that and they're adapting. When you look at all the LNG regas terminals that are being built in Europe, they see that they're going to need a little bit of everything for a long time until their final goals are achieved. Excuse me. So having that having that foundational truth, what we do here is so important, knowing that it is going to have an effect now and in 5 years and 10 years.
The other thing I think about too when we're talking about transparency, it's not just policymakers, it's not just folks in the industry, it's not just folks in this room. The public is demanding that sort of transparency as well. So your end product, my gas bill, or how I get my, how do I get my energy in my house? Those sorts of questions the public are asking now. And so it seems like, again, partnerships like this, where you can say, this is exactly, we're going to verify and we're going to monitor and we're going to make sure you understand exactly sort of how throughout the entire supply chain, how you're getting the energy that you need. It just feels like this is a part of the sort of equation, the calculus.
Yeah, it is. And I actually want to go back to on one of the slides that Arvin showed, and you asked the question earlier about policy and informing policy. I thought that was a great slide. And I do think one of the important roles that MDEL can play is making sure that policy is evolutionary, because it's so, you heard about the technologies that are emerging, the work you're doing here, you're just getting started, right? Like this is going to be an evolutionary process. I actually serve on PHMSA's advisory committee as a member of industry. We have members of government and of the public, and the discussion we're having right now is there's this rush to want to regulate, but we have to be careful that we don't create prescriptive policies that prevent or stymie the ability to continue evolving. So I do think that partnership is going to be really important in order to make this most effective.
Dave, we got any questions?
We've got a number of questions coming in through Slido. So again, in the audience, you can tie into Slido by clicking on that QR code. But some of the questions are related to markets, and so I'm going to combine a couple of questions. So you both noted about the transition in Europe from Russian gas to now U.S. gas over the last year or so. And given the perception and perhaps the reality that Russian gas has relatively high emissions, why the sudden shift in Europe to this focus on differentiated gas? And then looking forward, for markets in Asia, how do you see those markets evolving, and what might drive those markets?
So let's break it down into the two territories. So Europe. The last couple of years have been very interesting in Europe. So it's not just LNG that feeds Europe. They get piped gas from Algeria. They get some that still comes from Russia. They're getting about 2 BCF a day that still comes from Russia. But what Europe has had to do is they've had to ration. We've seen about 17% of industry gas usage drop since the conflict started, really I'm going to say when it really took effect in the middle of 2022. We'll see if that industry comes back. Some of that industry has moved. What Europe is having to do is they are continuing to deploy solar and wind. They're using gas. They've kind of come to where they know that for the foreseeable future, they've got to have a little bit of everything, because that's what's going to keep industry going. That's what's going to keep the lights on at people's houses. When you come to Southeast Asia and China, they just continue to grow, right? They manufacture almost everything that we use here in the world. And so China has continued to build a lot of US LNG. I'm pretty convinced that next year in 2024, China will be the largest single LNG importer in the world, most likely over 100 million tons, which is about a quarter of everything that is produced right now. So massive continued growth in China, but China's also building a lot of coal. They are also the largest implementer by a factor of 7 or 8 times the rest of the world when it comes to solar and other renewables. So the growth is really, as we see, going to come from in Southeast Asia for the next 5 to 10 years. Europe, I think, will continue to manage, but I think they're going to continue to be heavy in solar, heavy in wind deployment, and then continue to use LNG as the backstop, like what Chad was talking about, to be flexible. What's really going to be interesting to me is the development of new technologies, not only that we're going to look at here in MDEL and for the measurement and verification piece, but other technologies like nuclear. I think nuclear is part of the solution. very expensive, very big, but if there is something that can be done on a modular basis, I think that's going to really be the big game changer for Europe.
Yeah, and I would just add, Europe is a great lesson for us in the U.S. I mean, they're a large consumer of energy, but don't have a lot of native production, so they depend on other countries for their energy. It's why, hydrogen is a moonshot, but it's really important for Europe. They're very focused on trying to produce something domestically, and imagine if the U.S. couldn't have been able to triple LNG imports into Europe during the last 18 months, what the world would have looked like. So think about the energy security blanket that we provide to the world when we are first energy independent and then capable of exporting it around the world. Europe is going to continue to need energy imports in order to supply their countries. And Corey's right. I was there for a couple of weeks earlier this summer, and it was a pretty tough place to be from an energy perspective. I mean, it's you'll hear people talk about, oh, great, gas demand is down, we're conserving gas. That's not what's happened. Factories have shut down. People have lost jobs, and that production has moved to Asia, some to the United States, because the cost of energy and energy scarcity is such a problem in Europe. And so we've got to help solve that. One thing that's also interesting for the group that I learned over there, what I love about the universities, the work that we do, the U.S. is very much focused on engineering our way through solutions. Europe will admit that they took a very punitive approach to their decarbonization process, that they have been passing regulations and laws that have been making it harder and more costly to emit versus stimulating investments in next generation technologies. And they were actually very, I think, jealous but also frustrated by the IRA that was passed in the United States. They viewed that as something that was more focused on investing in the development of next generation technologies. And so I think it's a pretty interesting difference in paradigm.
No, it's carrots and sticks, right? We talk about it all the time. I'm curious about the conversations in boardrooms and with with shareholders about, look, MRV adds cost. And so when you talk about these are the things we have to think about and these are the things we have to implement, that's a discussion you have to have with the folks who are involved.
So this is a big focus of discussion in our boardroom. It's one of our core values in our mission statement to provide clean, secure, affordable energy for the world. So to be clean, this is something that we talk about quite a bit. Yes, there is a cost, but if we're going to be on the forefront, we know that this is something that we have to invest in, which is why when I started off talking about technology, we want to invest in the technology. We want to help develop it, we want to implement it, we want to test it, and we want to use it once something is there. So when it comes to the boardroom, we set aside money to spend to develop this technology and to have it be a core piece of our business, because it is going to be a core piece of our business. Just like I was talking about, this is something that I think that our customers are going to be asking for in the future. We need to spend the money to get it down now and be ahead of it more so than be reactionary.
Yeah, and also on energy affordability, this is another reason why natural gas has been so important and will continue to be. At the retail level, the cost of natural gas to the consumer is 4 times cheaper than electricity, and that's today. That's before we invest trillions of dollars more into the electricity grid in a country where energy demand on whole is really not increasing. That's going to continue to increase costs of retail electricity. Natural gas for the last 15 years has frankly been subsidizing more expensive forms of energy because we've had very low cost gas due to the shale revolution. And so we can afford, it is 4 times more expensive today to consume electricity than it is natural gas. We can afford to invest in QMRV in order to prove up the benefits of our product.
Corey, you talked about, and I think this is really important, technologies, right? And so implementing, it's not going to be, and Arvind showed a slide about, this is going to be an evolutionary process. This is going to be figuring out what works best at what site. That's expensive too.
It is. And, again, part of what I think makes MDEL so important is once that technology is there and you get data from it, how do we analyze that data to make that technology even more effective? And I think that's really one of the things that academia is going to provide for us in a huge kind of way.
From y'all's perspective, Dave, actually, Dave, yeah, you got any questions?
Well, let's expand a little bit as the questions are asking us to on those drivers for your decision to be committed to MMRV. And there were a number of questions that you've already begun to address. What motivated you to make this business decision? But also, how do you convince others along your supply chains, others in the industry, to make those same decisions? What arguments can be used to bring other organizations and companies along?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, we have one of the largest, not only infrastructure companies, but also gas marketing platforms in the United States. And again, I mentioned earlier, like that system sources gas for customers based on geography, based on price. But we've been investing in this technology because we truly believe that the evolution of the energy ecosystem has to include the emissions considerations of the energy that you source and deliver, and that will work for natural gas. That will work for any energy. I liked the discussion about MDEL, evolving and providing solutions beyond just the natural gas value chain. I think it makes a ton of sense. I mean, alongside what we're investing in here, we're investing in technology with a company called Context Labs. We've started a venture capital fund. We've invested in several satellite companies, sensor companies. We need to synthesize and integrate the work that we're doing here and the work that we're doing with all of our partners in order to truly kind of enhance the value of our offering. And when we've done that, we've seen customers willing to partner with us and invest in those improvements to the value chain. I think we've seen good response there.
So we're being that fulcrum that I was talking about between the U.S. and the world. We're the nation's largest consumer of natural gas. We consume about 8% of everything that's produced on a daily basis. We're the largest holder of pipeline capacity on pipelines in the U.S. We're the second largest charterer of ships to move our product around the world. So in a lot of things, we are, if not the largest, one of the largest. And so from an influence standpoint, that's what we're using, is to take our message that this is a global product, and for those of you that we partner with here in the U.S., we want you to partner with us, with MDEL, with some of these technologies, so that it's the whole value chain. Because we are aware that we're not the only we're not the only exporter of LNG. We're not the only provider of energy around the world. So that secure, affordable, like Chad and I have talked about, we want to be one of the cleanest, because there are other technologies or are other providers out there. By leveraging our relationships with our partners, that just gives us as a country a more competitive advantage around those in the world that may not be taking this into account.
Talk a little bit about the need. Of course, this is sort of self-serving for me. The ability to sort of translate this technology that's being implemented, that's being studied here in this room, to the people that you're talking to, up and down your supply chain, but also, again, like I said, the folks in your boardroom, also to the public, because one of the things we talk about all the time is when folks don't understand how things get to their homes, then you can have misconceptions. You can have sort of a negative idea about natural gas or about sort of whatever technology you're talking about. Sort of the ability to translate that technology to this is how it works. I'm curious about sort of how y'all are implementing that in the business.
So we've tried some initial technologies, and like I said, we've gone up and down our sites. We have very low methane emissions. But when we did see some, we would be looking at the data, send somebody out with a handheld, look at it. Yes, there is something right here. Identify what it is and fix it. We've actually had some events that we've shown PHMSA, one of our regulators, how we've been able to use this data and improve some of our emissions. So if we can do that, knowing that we are, Chad is one of our largest suppliers, if he can do that, that just cleans up the whole thing. And from a regulator standpoint, it makes their job a whole lot easier.
Yeah, and this is I love your role, Andy, and the bringing together of communications and education with technology and and business. Frankly, as an industry, we've been pretty weak. We've lost a lot of ground in getting our message out and people realizing that the energy doesn't just come from the light socket or the socket in the wall, that there's a tremendous industry behind this, and this industry has been evolving and it has done great things for society. And if you put this challenge in front of us today, I'll bet on this industry to solve the challenge, as the industry has always done. And so that's hard. But I will tell you, the first time a couple years ago, I came into the boardroom and I said, I want us to invest in an advertising and public relations campaign. And for us, it was a $6 million ask, which is a lot of money for a company that had a budget of zero. And the engineers who are now the leaders in the room said, well, how do you measure, what's the return on that, and how do you measure, because we build a pipeline, man. We know we're going to spend this amount of money and we're going to make exactly this amount of revenue off that. It's a very, unusual, unnatural space for us, but it is so important for us to get the message out and to educate folks. And we've had to do that internally, and we're doing that with our customers. I will tell you, when we do it, we're not getting, there's always going to be a group that says, I want no fossil fuels. That's a religion. That's not a solution. If you want no emissions, we're in. Let's get after it together. But we've got to be able to communicate with the people that will listen. And my experience has been customers, internally, externally, people get it. They want the same thing that we do.
Yeah, monetizing the message is actually pretty difficult. You're exactly right. Dave, you got any more?
Yeah, we challenged our audience earlier to think ahead 5 years and what the science and engineering and the measurements might look like 5 years from now. What do the markets look like 5 years from now? Is it an expectation that we have low emission gas in all markets? How do you see that evolving?
I'll start on, and then I'll hand it to maybe the downstream. On the midstream and kind of infrastructure networks that we have, I don't know that we'll be there at 100% within the next 5 years. I hope that Williams will in our infrastructure, and I hope that the rising tide will lift all ships. But the goal for us is that, again, when people source energy, I want to actually see a competition for the cleanest energy supplies, competition for the cleanest paths through which you can move it, and competition to deliver it to customers that want the cleanest product possible. If we can evolve the way that we source and deliver natural gas, the market will compete for the cleanest resource out there. That's when you start to evolve an entire energy market and value chain. And so that's how we're thinking about the next 5 years, and then bring that to the broader industry over the next decade.
And I think globally, it's the same. What I would say about globally and focusing on us as the U.S., we're all in it together, which goes back to some of the questions about getting some of our partners in. We just all have to realize that we're all in this together.
You made reference to the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'm curious about, from y'all's perspective, because we sort of think about, if you're a hydrogen business, if you're thinking about renewables and things like that, of course, that sort of gets mentioned first. But there's also opportunity for natural gas companies. There's opportunity for traditional fossil fuels to make use of those allocated funds. Tell me about sort of the thinking. And I imagine, again, this is one of those things where you have folks digging through and figuring out exactly how to make opportunity of these subsidies, yeah?
So as part of the liquefaction process, when you take something warm and you're getting it really cold and you've got to clean the gas before it goes through these processes, we spit off some things. We have a pure stream of CO2 that we've been looking, okay, can we take this and can we use carbon capture and sequestration? What does it cost to get that out? What are the benefits under the IRA? Is it economical, and does it move us forward? We've been looking at that. We spit off some things where we can make ammonia. We can, with all the technology that we have with the cryogenic process, we can do hydrogen. It's just a matter of, can you do it in scale? Is it economic? Safety is paramount to me, and it's paramount to Cheniere. Some of these things come with, okay, we've really got to look at some of the safety aspects. So yeah, there are opportunities that we continually look at, some that were spurred by the IRA that we will continue to look at. But I think carbon capture is probably the largest technology that will help industry as a whole in the U.S. continue to lower its emissions.
Yeah, and what I love about the natural gas value chain, it really is it is a demonstration of the ability to crack the code on energy systems. We can produce energy far from where it's consumed. We can move it over vast distances. We can store it without it depleting over time. And when we move it over vast distances, we don't lose it. We've got to confirm and prove that. But we can deliver it, frankly, we can produce energy in Wyoming and we can deliver it to friends and allies around the world. Like that's the value chain that you want to have in an energy ecosystem. And it's actually very rare, certainly to have, it doesn't exist from a clean energy perspective at scale. And so that's the challenge that we have and we need to build upon. And I say this all the time, we're not going to tear the roads out to build new roads for electric vehicles. Like we have to figure out how to leverage the existing infrastructure and the existing energy value chains in order to evolve to the energy of the future. So, I think about something like hydrogen. If hydrogen can work at scale, it's going to need to leverage the existing ecosystem, the existing infrastructure. We've got a great wind resource. I mentioned Wyoming. We operate across 1 million acres in Wyoming. It's the size of Delaware. Every time I go there, I ask myself why they filmed Star Wars in Tunisia. Like you could have definitely filmed it, in Wamsutter, Wyoming. But we've got a great wind resource. We've been trying to connect wind power in Wyoming to California for 20 years, but we can't build I think it's hard to build a pipeline. It's really hard to build transmission lines. But imagine if we could produce wind power in Wyoming and generate hydrogen. One of the interesting things, it's a desert in Wyoming. It actually sits on top of an ancient ocean. You talk about what you all do here. If we could produce wind power in Wyoming, generate clean hydrogen, and move it through existing pipelines to California, to New York City, store it like we do natural gas today. That's how over time we need to be thinking about leveraging the know-how and the capabilities that we have.
You talked a lot about sort of the value chains throughout, and this is one of those things that I think about all the time. I'm sure you guys talk about this too. When you're monitoring, that is your product. If it's escaping and if it's losing, if you're losing that methane, that's a loss. And so the conversations, of course we're going to have to pay for this, but at the same time, we're going to get more out of the product, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Fair enough. Dave, we got anything?
Sure, you've already talked a fair amount about the IRA, but can you speak a little bit more about what role the IRA is playing currently in decision-making? And given that it's going to expire in 5 years, what does the transition look like as those government carrots begin to disappear?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. And it is something that's being factored into the decision-making process. We have a large CCUS project to deliver Haynesville gas at the lowest carbon footprint possible to Corey and Cheniere and other LNG exporters along the coast. When we look at that, and we are asking ourselves about the duration of those tax credits. Those tax credits account for a fairly significant amount of value that you need in order to invest. And CO2 sequestration is a tough challenge. As Corey mentioned, you need a very concentrated quantity of CO2. Most of the CO2 emissions in the United States are pretty diluted. If you think about even at like the back end of a power plant, it's mostly air that comes out, and it's a little bit, relatively, a little bit of CO2. So it's very expensive to get that CO2 into a pure stream so that you can sequester it. And so that's what we're focused on, and absolutely in making investments around them. But I can tell you that when we build an economic model around it, we're having a lot of debates around how we for industries have primarily invested based on the market being willing to pay for the product. Now we're talking about incentives being a bigger portion of what drives the investment. We have to have confidence that those incentives are a Kickstarter, that they're going to help us build technologies, reduce costs, and increase market support so that over time, we phase into a market-supported structure and not just an incentive-based structure.
That's a great way to look at it. We look at it right now along the same ways, but carbon capture I already talked about. Some of the renewable power, we're a large power consumer at our site in South Texas in Corpus Christi. Is it beneficial to develop resources, renewable resources that will feed us? We are a 24/7 operation. We have to take the government subsidies and overlay that with making sure that we can operate 24 hours a day. What does that cost? So it's more than just evaluating what the subsidies are. We tie it in with safety. We tie it in with our continual operations, because we can't just, if we were to go buy solar, we've got to have something else to back it up.
I was asking the folks last week about the hydrogen group, about sort of the U in the CCUS, the utilization. It seems like we're doing a lot of we're thinking a lot about the storage, not necessarily about carbon as a commodity. I'm curious from y'all's perspective, those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a small example. We've invested in a company that takes methane and through pyrolysis will produce solid carbon and hydrogen. So you think about your ability to leverage the existing infrastructure, the existing value chain. You know, I do think we need to be thinking about, you know, how we can produce carbon as a useful material, how we can leverage. You know, it's again why when we talk about, you know, just eliminating fossil fuels, it doesn't necessarily make sense. We've got such an abundant supply of resource here in the United States. Let's figure out how to do things like turn CO2 or turn carbon into useful products. And so we are investing in companies and looking at technologies that would do that.
We don't go that far. We're really focused on LNG, unfortunately. But when I think about, can we take some of what we do, and I kind of addressed this earlier, can we take some of what we do from the cryogenic process and look at hydrogen, look at some of these things that could be subsidies somewhere down the road? That is something that we continue to look at.
Dave, did you have it looked like you were
I was
excited about a
amused,
question.
by one
go
of the
ahead.
questions. So I'm going to ask that question the way it was asked, and then I'm going to translate it.
Sure.
So the question was, would you trust Dave Allen with his toolbox to fix your racing bicycle? And so I think the way to translate that is, how do we develop trust and credibility in all this work we're going to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'd first say I love your passion, and I think when you believe in what you're doing, if you believe in the cause and you find real meaning and purpose in it, I think it's pretty easy to have conversations with folks. I mean, again, I mentioned I sit on, you know, the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee, and you know, I sit on that committee with EDF and the Pipeline Safety Trust and members that, you know, I think when you can get past the you know, the posters and the taglines that each of us have to live by, I think if you've got real passion and conviction around what you're doing and you're doing it for the right reasons, it's pretty easy to get to a common goal. Oftentimes we get into conflicts over what we think are the best ways of getting there. But if we share a common goal, I mean, this was my message in Europe. I mean, when we were over there, you know, one person was like, you know, you guys just don't care about the environment like we do. And I said, you know, you don't love your kids more than I do. Like, we both care about the planet. We both care about the future of our children. We may have different ideas on how we want to get to the same goal, but once you realize that you want the same things, you care about the same things, I think things, you know, the rhetoric hopefully tamps down, and you can get focused on solutions. So you just got to do the work. You got to communicate.
If you're going to teach fellow engineers at the University of Texas, yeah, I'll trust you to fix my bike. But when I think about what I said earlier about trust, verification and transparency, that is the key. If you are totally open, and we want to be totally open, and you can verify everything that you're talking about, the numbers, what the effects that you're having, that is what establishes trust.
One thing we've been talking a lot about is, it feels like, you know, when we talk 2030, when we talk 2050, when we talk sort of far out goals, sort of making those goals more imminent, or making those goals for the public and even for people that you work with, people in your boardrooms, sort of understanding it feels like it's far away, but we need to be thinking about these things right now.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've got a goal for a 56% reduction in emissions by 2030, and obviously, you know, a target towards net zero by 2050. But that feels like it's far away. But you know, the scale of our operations, I mean, we're moving a third of the nation's natural gas. Like, that's a massive, clear, measurable goal, and we need this effort in order to help us target the work that we're doing. Not only is it credibly measuring, but you saw it, it's also helping us target where the emissions are most meaningful and where we can start, chipping away with the biggest bang for our buck at reducing emissions over time. And that's why, this effort is so important.
And we don't have a goal per se. We will have a goal. We joined OGMP last year, which is a United Nations organization reducing methane emissions. So we will have a methane goal that we will establish most likely by the end of next year or early 2025, which the gold standard is 0.05% for OGMP. I think we'll be well under that. So that will come, but the foundations that we're living by when we look at whether it's setting a goal, the way that we operate our business is we want to be scientific minded, which is why we're involved with MDEL. We want to be actionable. We want it to be real. We don't want to set a target that we can't achieve. So we want to be actionable, and then we want to be transparent. We want to be transparent along our whole supply chain, which is going back to what I was talking about, including Chad and the pipelines, the producers, shipping, and our customers around the world, knowing that if we can get everybody on the same page, we will have a global impact along the whole value chain.
You got a last one for us, Dave?
Well, I'll just take this opportunity to remind everyone of what's next, which is the break. We want to hear your ideas about where we're going to be and what the questions we're going to be addressing in 5 years. And then I would just open it up to our panelists to make any final remarks before we break for coffee and further exchange.
I want to thank UT for hosting this. It's great to be back. It's been a long, long time since I've been back, even though we're not really on campus. But thanks for the great questions. But most of all, thanks for what you do. Thanks for partnering with us because, as Chad and I have both said, this is important. And this is going to make a difference in the future, not only for the United States, but really for the whole world. But the United States, in my mind, has the perfect chance to be the leader once again in something that when I saw the petroleum engineering dean say, it's going to affect the future. And if I can just be a Longhorn, what starts here really will affect the world.
Yeah, and that's hard to follow a Longhorn, passionate boilers. Any in the room? Probably not. But I was really impressed by the presentation this morning, for the investment that we're making as companies, the partnership that we have. You all have done a great job of getting organized and getting pointed in the right direction, and I feel very confident and comforted by seeing the level of kind of focus and effort that's being put forth. So I just want to say thank you. I mean, we are what you're doing. I hope you've heard. I think that it's an incredibly important part of what we're trying to accomplish as an industry, and it can be oftentimes hard to see that bigger purpose and picture of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. But I said it earlier, like I truly believe that we in this room and across this industry have the opportunity to solve one of the world's greatest challenges, and so that's really gets me excited, and I hope you all keep up the great work. So thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. One more round of applause for these guys. Thank you.
Good seeing you, man.